All right. So last time saphela kwinto morality, right? And I said in the last video, as I was reviewing incwadi Henri Junod, of the Swiss something, I said in Dobana, one of the things that I learned from the the book is that they are, or at least I took away from the book, not necessarily that I learned from the book, but the things that I took away from the book when I was assessing, what was in the book and how we are doing things now, is that morality or properness, being proper, being moral, the way that we conduct ourselves and judge ourselves to be moral or good people or behaving in a good way within the whole that is society, is very much, as South African people, a lot of it actually is to do, I'm not saying the majority of it or anything like that, I'm just saying a lot of it is a lot to do or is an outcome of the colonial, of the Christian missionary project. So ndiyafuna yokuqala ke into yobana ethi le ncwadi ebhalwe nguHenri Junod. Henri Junod is but one man who was a missionary. Yes, he was working within the system of missionariness, and he was trying to do things for the missionary, but he was but one man. And so his insights and his writings are from the position of one man. And so even some of the biases that he has, naturally the missionary biases, but also just the biases of his own intellectual capacity and his own upbringing and the way that he does things, and he was raised, will naturally inform the way that he understood and he read situations, right? And therefore that translates also to me, it carries to me, but I'm but one individual. And so my biases and my own outlook and my understanding of the world will inform the way that I understood, or at least some of the learnings that I got from this book. One of my major biases that is applies quite deeply to this kind of writing and this kind of work is my bias on, death to the missionary project and all of its offshoots and all of its side effects. So death to the entire thing. And so a lot of the way that I understand and analyze things will have a little bit of that lens. And so it is important as abantu emhlabeni abaphilayo abafuna ubangcono, and to just grow ourselves and to just do better or to know more or to whatever. Okay? It is important to read widely and to listen widely, to engage widely, and to take information from different spaces, because you might find ubana indlela endiyibona ngayo into mna ayizofana nendlela wena ozoyibona ngayo, right? And so the way that I understand this book might be different to how you might interpret the book. And so it's important, but even though I'm doing this, now you take the time to actually read the book. The other thing that I didn't say last time is the fact that this book is actually free, or at least I got it for free online from the UCT library, it seemed. So if you just go online and you Google it, and it pops up on the UCT library. And so I found it online, and I've been reading a digital version of the book. I don't have an actual physical copy of the book, which is great because these books are so flipping expensive. Like I said last time, like this book, I bought it, it was around 2,000 rands on Take a Lot. So like education is so expensive, man. You're so expensive. But anyway, so with that being said, like this is but one view of one person's writing. Yeah, Eva. So it's important now to read on your own. But with that being said, back to my assessment and what I've learned, or at least taken away from the book. And one of those things is on the fact that a lot of what we deem as proper behavior, proper social communal behavior, and proper ways of being as a person within the world and understanding and existing amongst other people in the South African context as African people, a lot of it has actually been a product of the missionary project. The first example that I'm going to give that I got from this book is something that seems so banal, but it actually is quite important in terms of understanding where we are as people, and the things that seem small but are actually quite significant because they determine how we behave and how we carry ourselves through the world and how we view the world. And that first example is on names and naming children, right? Yes, there's going to be, the rituals of naming and all of that, and that in itself is a whole other thesis that somebody can write about. But the example that I want to make here is an example that Henri, or something that Henri Junod speaks about in terms of how in the Tonga community, at the time that he was writing this book, naming children was actually something that was done. It wasn't necessarily like, it wasn't a case yobana in the way that we do today, where we say bana, there are names that are applicable to only girl children, or girl or male individuals that are human beings, and then there are names that are only applicable to boys or male people that are human beings in the world. And so the way that we understood, the way that we name people is actually not how it was understood back in the time that Henri Junod was writing this paper, right? And so there was, sorry. So in terms of naming, when we think now, when a child is born or a child is about to be born or whatever, Sana, we go on these internet websites. I remember when I was gonna have my baby, like go on these internet websites and like there's 1,000,001 names that are just boy names. And then there's 1,000,001 names that are just girl names. And there you transgress and just you apply a boy name to a girl or a girl name to a boy. Whoa, and Zandoni. So when you look at Henri Junod's book about the Tonga, he says that in terms of naming, the names of the Tonga are the same for the two sexes. There are only two of them which cannot be employed indiscriminately for girls and boys. He says, Nwanin is a girl's name as it means girl, and Nwanjise is a boy's name as it means boy. So he says, no matter, like, there is no delineation between, a boy name and a girl name. The only time that you can't you can't use a name that is a boy or a girl is only when you say boy or girl. Then it applies to boy or girl. And I think you see this even sometimes Tsonga in this day and age, where you will find that a lot of Tsonga, it's not uncommon for Tsonga to have a girl that is Gugu and a boy that is Gugu. Even though when you think about it in maybe like Nguni language, like Zulu or whatever, right? And so there will be kind of a girl, Gugu boy, njani. And when you really think about it now, when you're reading this text, you realize, even the fact that Amatsonga, even today, there are names that apply across the board, could actually be an echo. It could be an echo of how things were done prior in pre-colonial Africa, where Tsonga people were of the understanding that there are no names that are gender specific. Names are generally gender neutral until you come to a point of saying boy or girl, at which point that's when the only time that you can delineate. I think this goes, it goes and flows nicely with that whole thing about how, there isn't a she and a he necessarily in Nguni languages. And I think a lot has been set up around that in terms of a lot of podcasts and readings and, academic literature on African ways of knowing and doing. And that, Indoka he, she is fundamentally a Western construct mostly. And so even it's a Western construct, but the way we've taken it on, bana hayi kuthanda unika umuntu igama lomfana umntana ontombazana okanye hayi kuthanda unika intombazana igama labafana ayibona into iwesi ke ngoku when you give a boy child a girl name, that is just like hayibo ithini into yakho kuthanda unika umntana komfana igama lentombazana. And when you really think about it now, if you sit and you listen, if you read this text, and it's all texts say this, but if you read this text and you note this particular thing, Watonga, you then realize, actually, there's different names for different sexes, might actually not even be an African way of understanding properness in terms of naming children, and it might just be an outcome and a consequence of a successful missionary project. So the other thing that we need to talk about again when we talk about, while we're on the issue of children and we're thinking about, what morality and properness actually means. In this day and age where umnana will be born out of wedlock, and then umnana who's born out of wedlock, maybe the father goes away and he gallivants and he lives his best life as men generally do. They just forget whether they had a child, or even if they don't forget, they don't care a damn, and then they just whoop out of into thin air. Like 15, 16 years later, talking about and there's going to be this narrative, even in the community, even as this child is raised and is growing up. This child, yes, they are growing up at the mother's home with the mother's family, but their home, like where they belong, is at their father's family. Meanwhile, these people are not married, right? The mother and the father were never married. They had this child. They were 16. They had a child together because these things happen. Or even if they were 35 and they had a child together and then they broke up and like they were never married. And so now this child grows up with this narrative around themselves that Oabo, Ekaya, their home is where their father's home. But they've never even seen these people. Or even if they have seen these people, they didn't grow up with these people. These people didn't bother to even put in the time and the energy and the resources to raise this child. So this child, for all intents and purposes, the only home he's ever known or she has ever known is this home Gamamake, right? And this family Gamamake, this is the only family they've ever known and the family they've ever had. And so now suddenly they find themselves like there's this big hoo-ha about the fact that this circumcision or whatever, because his man. A lot of that is actually a product of the missionary project. And I would be so bold as to say it is a product of the missionary project amongst almost all, if not all, Bantu groupings. Because KwaXhosa, it's the same thing in terms of what I'm going to say now about what Henri Junod found. KwaXhosa, it's the same thing. KwaThonga, it's the same thing. KwaPedi, it's the same thing. And so it seems to me that this same thing is actually how it existed across KwaBantu. And this devaluing of the maternal lineage is actually very much a mission of a product of the missionary project, the Christian missionary project. So what Henri Junod finds in his findings, or he documents in the way that he observes what happens KwaThonga, is that umnana who is born out of wedlock, first of all, but before we like London, how old people are always like, they're having children, these children, this generation has gone to their dogs. Even they were doing it. But anyway, I digress. The point is that umnana who is born out of wedlock in Tonga culture, according to this book, and the cultures that are around this area of Tonga, actually that child is a member, is the legitimate member of the mother's family. This whole notion like whether or not no, that is not how it was structured. And I know KwaXhosa it's very clear like but if you take popular culture, popular culture will make you believe that this child is identityless, is homeless if this father does not agree to take this child on and this child is not taken back to their father's home. No, at the mother's family. Like but even KwaThonga, it was that umnana who is born out of wedlock is the child of the mother's family. And they have rights that are observed for them as a child who is born of a daughter of this home, right? And it's not a transmission, a crisis, and this child has no identity and they are lost if the father runs away. Naturally, because it was encouraged. Family was a real thing. It's family structures need to be held together. People need to get married. That has always been the case. It's not like must be running around having babies all over the place and nobody cares about being married, right? but there were things that there were systems in place that would encourage and push forward the idea, but I know you need to get married in order to have children. But if a child was had out of wedlock, the mother and the mother's family have the rights to this child, and they raise the child. Umntana akhula be right, ingabikho into wrong, konke iphambanisayo phaya into yoba umntana akayanga kuloyise, ayibona. And so when you look at where this idea of man and ownership of child comes from, even when he has not done the things that grant him the rights, like this blanket, just automatic right to be a father and to hold the no when you haven't done the things that need to be done in order to ensure that your rights you are able to exercise your rights over this child's life. When you look at it, it goes back to this thing of this patriarchy in the way that it's understood in European settings, and which is then understood through the biblical text of Christian missionary, right? Or at least the way it's interpreted. Man, I the biblical text, because also the problem with the Bible is that it's interpreted, right? And it's interpreted in the way that serves whatever narrative the people who are interpreting it are supposed to be trying to put forward, right? And so the Christian missionary agenda, it came with this understanding of the woman as a possession. The woman as a possession of the husband. And then in popular culture now, you have this whole thing about a man being the head of the household, and everything else after the head is below the head, right? And so that in itself is a narrative that makes moral and proper the idea that a woman must be owned. And that's why you find even the feminist movements that we engage in ourselves, even as African women, are in it fundamentally, drawn from the feminist movements of Europe. They are European feminist movements until we are able to, enough to be able to define what African feminism actually means for us. They are very fundamentally European, because European women have been struggling with these issues of being properties of, even about the slave trade. Like, Europe is okay with trading in slavery or oppression or ownership of human bodies, right? And so this then translated into the ownership of wives, ownership of daughters. So if you look at them and the way that they were doing things, that is where it was. When you look at African communities prior to the advent of colonialism, you find women were actually responsible for agriculture. And if you are responsible for agriculture, then you are responsible for the stomach, right? And I'm saying, and that gives you power, obviously, in order to be able to determine the narrative and the movement of society, and how these communities actually grow and they advance based on different viewpoints from both men and women, because the power structures are symbiotic. They are sort of symbiotic. Obviously, again, nothing is perfect. So even in those spaces, it was not like everything was perfect. But there was a power that was held by women, because women were responsible for agriculture. And then with the advent of colonialism and white people and them getting here and realizing, who the hell do they think they are, right? And so then there was a taking of this man. And it's not saying this man was useless. This man had his own responsibilities in hunting, safety in the home, and all of the things that he needed to do. So it's not that they were useless, but now there was this European understanding and agenda, this missionary agenda that says, take the man, put him at the top in the home, take the woman, subjugate the woman under the man, and then take the children who are then subjects underneath as well. Problem with that, Gengog, is that not only does it disempower, because somebody else might just be like, it's only disempowering to the women, the men are still fine. No, it's not empowering, because go good for the men. Because you find, as a man, you've been stripped of your power to have a partner in terms of thinking and your outlook in life, right? You stop having a partner, you now have somebody that is beneath you that you can have power over instead of power with. Now, if you are running a home together where you are the only one with power over everybody, and you don't have umlingani wako, you've only got people that are subject to your power. That strips you of a certain amount of ability to be able to steer this home in a beautiful way, or at least steer the community, or whatever the case may be in terms of, the functions of the man in the community. And you see, that stripping of, the function or the power of man in itself was a product of the missionary project. And so we find in this day and age, we'll be talking about, indoda, nguyo ophathayo, indoda ntoni. And then you find even things like, the children, when a child is born out of wedlock and there's no marriage and there's no staying together, now umntana na identity because le ndoda ibalekile. And you find even this idea of men not being in homes, men being able to be, to vacate their positions as husbands, as fathers, as uncles, as even that in itself is a product of, this migrant labor that made it norm for men to be removed from their communities and go off to Johannesburg and to wherever else, and then the women are left on their own. And now what you are finding is that these women are left on their own in a space where now they've been told, no, but you are subjects of these men. But while you are subjects of these men, let's remove these men and leave you on your own, right? And then you find that these women then obviously life will continue, and so they'll take care of these children, and then they'll build new structures in these communities, right? But as soon as they build these new structures, this man comes back once a year, and then he still needs to have power over these people, and yet he doesn't even know how this community actually operates. It's dysfunction. And you find that dysfunction that we think is normal African ways of behaving and carrying ourselves, that we think is proper, is moral, is actually a function of the missionary project that succeeded. Another example that we find in Henri Junod's book about, the missionary project that succeeded is just on the issue of women and men now, moving swiftly along on the issue of women and men, on the issue of what we now consider adultery. So what we consider to be adultery in this day and age is actually something that was not necessarily in the way that we judge it, that the judgments that we make and the outcomes of the judgments that we make, or at least the actions that follow the act of adultery, are not what would have happened prior, according to this book, Tonga, right? Henri Junod and his assessment of the Tonga. So one of the things that he speaks about is that when men are cheating, so a man is married to his woman, he doesn't speak about people dating, and whether cheating is a thing if people are dating, but he does speak about, cheating in the context of marriage, right? And that would be adultery in his case, because he's a missionary. So as a missionary, the big thing that they care about is adultery, because the Bible. And so what he says about adultery in that book is that if a married man has an affair with an unmarried woman, that is not cause for concern, because this woman is unmarried, and so it is what it is. I don't know, I think maybe if I did a lot more reading on the Tonga, because I'm not Tonga, so if I did a lot more reading, maybe I might find a lot more nuance to this. But he says that it's not really a major issue. Yes, there'll be, I'm sure Abantu wouldn't be happy, right? Especially the wife wouldn't be happy. But generally, it's not like all the earth-shattering situation that has happened, right? But if a man has an affair with a married woman, that is earth-shattering. But even as it is earth-shattering, it is not grounds for a divorce, not only from the side of the man, but also not from the side of the woman, right? Because if this woman is married, it means they've got a husband that they need to account to, why are you having an affair with another man, right? So what then happens on the part of this woman is that he says, what will happen is that this woman, maybe this man hears from somewhere, or I don't know, he has some kind of clue of some sort. Obviously, I've got phone, so I must find out. But I found out, I found out And then undoda is then going to then push or put pressure on this woman to agree or to confess to her infidelity. And in her confession, this again is not grounds to divorce this woman. No. It's not grounds to divorce this woman. Then this man is then going to say, okay, because you've cheated, I now need to know who you've cheated with. And so now it's this woman's responsibility to entrap upartner wakhe lo mntu abhizi naye. And once he's been entrapped and he's been found and there's proof that he's cheating with this married woman, then the husband of the married woman will then go to the chief or whoever is responsible, who is above this man, the side man, will go to the side man's chief and demand imali yakhe lobolo. Like, I paid lobolo for this man, for this woman, and now this man thinks he can come in and have access to the thing that I paid lobola for. So therefore, I want and I demand lobola for this person that I paid lobola for. And so that man needs to now pay for lobola because he has soiled the name of the family and crisis, and that's his way to repair the crisis. And then beyond that, then there's also the kinds of like behavioral and structural and ritualistic processes that they need to follow for the rest of their lives in order to remedy the fact that this man has had an affair with the married woman, right? But even in that case, like, it's not grounds for a divorce, right? And so this woman now, yes, there are things that now she also has to do. There are things that she can and can't do because on the basis of she's had an affair, but it's not grounds for a divorce, right? Sometimes there's even this case where they say, okay, so this woman, maybe this man is in a polygamous relationship, right? And so in this polygamous relationship, this man then has so many wives that, maybe he's neglecting one of his wives, and he has a son who's grown enough, maybe from wife number 1, and now he's gone and taken wife number 7, and then as he's going about his business, he neglects wife number 7. Wife number 7 is very young. The son now has grown enough to be the same age as wife number 7, right? And so because this woman is neglected, the son sees by now neglected, and then they have an affair. So the son has an affair with his stepmom, basically, or his I don't know, his polygamy mother. I actually don't know what the word is for that kind of mother, for that kind of relationship. But he has an affair with his polygamy mother, right? And so even in that case, when that happens, it's not that the wife needs to be thrown out now. She's not thrown out. The son is not thrown out. But there are then rules of engagement for this son now, because he's gone and defiled his father. So one of the things that happens is that if the father dies, the son can't go, and even if the son is the firstborn son, which means indlalifa, right? So he's the heir to this family, but he can't go and engage in the funeral. He can't lead the funeral. He can't do things in the funeral because that is taboo. So there are a lot of taboos that then are triggered by the fact that there was this affair that happened. In the same way, if this woman then has not the wife, but if a woman then who's married goes and has a child outside of wedlock, that in itself is not grounds. And that child belongs to the family that this woman is married into. So if husband A is married to this wife, and wife has an affair with her concubine on the side, and they have a child, then the child belongs to the husband and that lineage of the family, right? Yes, it's stressful land, because when you think about it, a lot of people, you might find a lot of people are running around thinking they belong to certain families and they don't, because it was Lomnana just immediately falls into the marriage, right? This is a child of marriage, even though they were born of an illegitimate tryst with an outside man, right? So esixhoseni I know bana kukho umahluko between umntana wekhuko nomntana wedolo, and umntana wedolo ngumntana who's adopted from outside. I haven't really been able to find a lot on what the grounds are for umntana wedolo, on what kind of child can and can't be accepted, or what are the rules around how to accept umntana as umntana wedolo, but basically a child of adoption. So there's something similar here, because it's not grounds for divorce. it is not grounds for divorce, right? When Henri Junod, when he writes about it, he's like, in the case that this man is then known, okay, ngubani lona who is the actual father of this child, it is taboo for the lover of the woman to come to the door of the hut after the birth of the illegitimate child, as long as the umbilical cord has not fallen off. Even later on, should the mother be sitting on the threshold of the hut with the baby on her arms, and that man, so ulava ke ngoku, should pass on the street in front of them, one of the midwives will go and take between her fingers a pinch of sand from the footprints of the lava, and without a word will throw it on the fontanelle of the baby, your baby. If the husband happens to be present, he will know why by witnessing this act that he is not the true father. I do not think he will be angry. The child is his, and if it is a girl, nobody else will eat the oxen. Yeah. So and so these are the little rituals and the little actions and the things that are done on a daily to ensure we maintain equilibrium in the community, to then show but we accept this child wholeheartedly and fully. The most important thing here is about managing this equilibrium and relationship between the husband, the side boy, guy, man, and the wife, and making sure people don't overstep. They don't overstep. Like the husband also can't, if the husband finds this man or something, the husband can't help this man because they would surely die together. Or even if the husband has an illness or whatever, this man, even if he's a doctor, even if he's the only doctor in the community, the side person can't come and help the husband because that will surely lead to death. There are so many other things, right? So when you think about it, the idea of a wife must be cast out, or a marriage must fall apart on the grounds of infidelity, that is the construct of a missionary project, right? And I'm not saying when it's right, guys, and let's go around now, cheating and all of that because they used to do it in 1910. No, I'm just saying, in assessing the things the way they were and the things in the way that they are now, and they are no longer the way that they were. What is the interceding? What is the mediate point? What happened in the middle? What happened in the middle in order to fast track or to ensure that there's a particular kind of change? And when you think about what that thing was, it was a successful missionary project, right? And so the other thing that we talk about then is, about back to the story that I was telling you in my previous video around what the guy saying when he loved me with my husband, and me laughing at him, dude, like, what the hell? Like, I've never heard that. What are you saying? And I laughed at him and I dismissed him. And when I was telling the story, I laughed, he laughed, and when I was telling my partner as well, he laughed. And maybe when I told the story, maybe you also laughed. And I can guarantee you, what we were all laughing at was the preposterousness of the fact that this man, not only is he proposing to love me while I'm in a relationship with a husband, but he's proposing to love me and love the husband at the same time. And you know what? It's interesting actually, like this guy. What is funny is not, and even now when he proposed to me the idea of loving me with my husband, for him the issue was never the children. I said I had 3 children, and it was never an issue that I had 3 children, as if it's a given. But I said, I'll love you with your children. What he was proposing to fix, his solution was to fix this one issue of this husband. But I don't mind having you and your husband. That's ridiculous. I don't mind having you and your husband, right? And so that was the preposterousness, and I think now you would have laughed about that same thing when dude, you can't be having somebody and a husband, And that is a sort of idea of polyandry, right? And I want to argue based on this book again, in the even the idea of polyandry, in the way that we understand it now, for it being immoral, improper, not the right thing to do, even that itself can be argued based on this book, Guy Henri. Ubana, it's a product of the missionary project, right? And I say this because Henri then tells a story here. Well, now he was being told a story by one of his informants. And he was making a comparison between Kwatonga and Kwapedi, and in terms of how people behave, in terms of what they're allowed to do and not do sexually, in terms of who they can have sexual relations with. And a lot of it, he was just saying it's adultery, and he was flabbergasted. But now, what are these Africans doing with this nasty behavior of sexual misconduct, adultery? Obviously, this is a missionary approach, and this is a missionary perspective on everything that was happening. But yeah, one of the stories that he tells that he thinks is a good indication of adultery and how absolutely just out of control these Africans are, is the fact that during one of the research that he was doing, there's a story of this Pedi chief who, when he got married, he married a lot of women. He had a polygamous relationship because he could afford to have more than. So apparently, according to Henri, polygamy was generally between 2 wives to 3. But if you're a chief and you are well-to-do, then you'll have like ample wives and things like that. And so there's this thing where when a woman, according to Henri and some of the traditions, and some of the rituals and things that were done, when a woman is pregnant, the woman is considered to be some sort of soiled, basically. And so sexual relations are not allowed anymore between the husband and the wife while this woman is pregnant. And then after the pregnancy, then the wife goes through some sort of cleansing process, and then beyond the cleansing, once it's done properly, then they can resume their sexual relations, right? So this particular chief, he went and got lots and lots and lots of wives. And what he would do is that he would have sexual relations with his wives when they are still new until the wife gets pregnant. And then once the wife gets pregnant, then the thing of, having to be cleansed kicks in, right? And then when that kicks in, and then the wife is not accessible sexually, he wouldn't even wait, and he wouldn't be interested in the whole process of cleansing this woman after the fact of, giving birth. For him, this is done and dusted, move on, and he goes on to the next wife. Yeah. So, that is just bad human behavior, because even as we think about, all these traditions and these cultures across the board, whether missionary or African, there will always be human beings inside who are going to go and misbehave and just mess it up for everybody. And that was just bad behavior on that chief's part, because it was gluttony. It was greed, excess, long heart. So, but this was his process. And so what he would encourage was that once the woman has had the baby, then the woman must go and find herself a husband. I mean, a side person, a concubine, basically, a male concubine. Because Kwapedi at that time, it was not uncommon or weird for a woman to have more than one partner, right? Even as they are married. So the idea of polyandry existed in different forms, even not Kwapedi, just Kwapedi, even there were structures and systems in place that allowed for polyandry, so that a woman can have more than one partner, male partner. And so the idea of a woman being loved with her husband being loved with her husband was not an outlandish or a ridiculous thing, right? But now, like I want to know because just like this guy was being ridiculous. But now it's so ridiculous. And the ridiculousness the idea of it being ridiculous actually stems from the missionary project, from my reading of Henri's text, right? So when we talk about polyandry, and how I suppose polyandry is one of those things where, and I think a lot of it comes again back to the whole idea of an ownership of the female body and an ownership and a subjugation of female body to male power and male ownership and male guidance, because there's no sense of agency for women. And so polyandry would immediately go against that, right? It almost equalizes in some way. It equalizes the playing field for women, and therefore then goes against the idea of the man being the head of the household, right? And a man being able to own. And therefore the missionary project could not then allow for the existence of something like that, right? And so this is where we see then the bastardization of polyandry and its different formats, whether they be through marriage, whether they be through just dating and relationships. Then that becomes unholy, it becomes improper, it becomes immoral. And then we find ourselves in 2026 living in a world where polyandry, or in South Africa, in a space where polyandry is something wild that is done, or it's something, exotic, or something so different that is othered, that is done by a Queen Mujaji, but we don't do that, right? Because that is not proper. And that is a result of the Christian missionary project having succeeded in this space, in the Bantu traditions of South Africa, right? So the other thing then, moving from polyandry, we go then into the issue of polygamy, or into the practice of polygamy, and how we now understand polygamy. And I want to say, but even polygamy, as we view it now, and as we practice it and we understand it, is itself, our views and our perspectives and our judgments of its properness and improperness, of its morality and immorality, is a result of the successful missionary project, right? We can argue that based on this book. So, in my assessment, obviously. So, the funny thing is though that, when Henri writes about polygamy in this book, he's then naturally he's a missionary, and it was one of these big things that they had to deal with as missionaries, because it completely went against the morality. Again, we're moral basis, which is adultery of Christianity and the way they understood Christianity at the time. And so when he writes about polygamy, he says, Christian missions have long ago begun to fight against this evil. All missionaries who have lived amongst the Bantu and know something of native life agree on one point. Polygamy is incompatible with the high moral ideal and the family ideal which Christianity has brought into the world. Therefore, they all work against it. They all also agree that a polygamist who wants to become a Christian must by no means be prevented from doing so. He is to be accepted as an inquirer, right? Curious, but he hasn't really. So he is accepted as an inquirer and a candidate for baptism. But divergence of view begins on the question of receiving a polygamist into full church membership by baptism. We can distinguish 4 different points of view on this question, corresponding to 4 different courses. So there is the latitudinarian, the idealistic, the extreme, and the midway course. So the latitudinarian view says that, and it was taken by Bishop Colenso. It says, enforcing separation on polygamist converts is quite unwarrantable. They have been married according to the practice of their land. We have no right to require them to cast off their wives and cause these poor creatures in the eyes of all their people to commit adultery. What is to become of their children? And what is the use of our reading to them the Bible stories of Abraham, Israel, and David with their many wives? Let us admit polygamists of all standing to communion. The only difference which Bishop Colenso would admit between polygamous and monogamous is that the former ought not to be admitted to the offices in the church, right? So you can become a Christian and you can be baptized and you can continue with your polygamy. So yakulimita laa nto. If ufuna isikhundla, then lahla laa nto yobupolygamist, yayiva? The idealist view says that it is taken by those who are satisfied with the promise on the part of the husband and his extra wives to have no conjugal relations anymore and allow the separated spouses to remain in the husband's village and the husband to care for them and their children. I think Mnalena is quite an interesting one for me, this idealistic view, because you are allowed to marry many people, right? So the idea is to marry many people, but you are not allowed to have sexual relations with these people, which means polygamy is not improper, is not immoral in and of itself. What is being policed here is sexual relations amongst people. This is the interpretation that I take away from this one. Like, we are policing sexual relations here, and this idea that African people are over-sexualized and therefore they need to be curbed, their sexuality needs to be curbed, and therefore this is why we must stop this polygamy. Because, and he says this in this book quite a bit, but polygamy and Africans, they become so sexually enticed and sexually, exploratory and sexually and it's this idea of the sexual exchange between people that becomes the problem that the missionary project must fight against. Some sort of chastity must happen here so that you can control these Africans. And you can make all kinds of arguments around that thing. But now that was the interesting thing that I took away from this idealistic view. So then the extreme point of view says, in some cases, missionaries have required not only total separation, a new and faraway domicile for the separated wives, but that the husband should reclaim all the lobola oxen in order to break any ties still existing between him and them. This practice may be legitimate when we have reasons to doubt the good faith of the converted polygamist. That is the extreme point of view. Leo, it comes with its own issues here. Around the families and returning of ilobola and respecting the fact that ukulobola umntu is not just about sending cows away. This is about family bonds and family ties and intercommunal ties, and how the missionary project then does away with those considerations, because what matters is just imposing this missionary understanding of what is moral and immoral, right? Then there's the midway course, which is followed by almost all the missionary societies, right? It's set forth in the regulations of the Berlin Society and in the report of the Anglican Conference of Bishops at Lambeth is the following one. Polygamists must not be admitted to baptism, but be accepted as candidates and kept under Christian instruction until such time as they shall be in position to accept the law of Christ. Wives of polygamists, on the other hand, ought not to be denied baptism if they deserve it, as it is not in their power to separate from the polygamic family. So I think my assessment of this situation is that when you read this text and you read a lot of other texts, even like Henri and herself, when he starts on this issue of polygamy and this topic of polygamy, he himself says, polygamy is practiced with the thing across all Bantu cultures and Bantu peoples, and so it is something that is completely ingrained in the behavior and in the character of Bantu people and how Bantu people see themselves, right? But and therefore it is that much harder to then divorce Bantu people from this polygamy. But this polygamy is such a big friction point for the missionary project that it's something that needs to be worked on and disintegrated and removed as quick and as fast as possible. Because I think the issue with polygamy also is that it fights against, or at least it's in opposition to the missionary project on so many different levels, on levels of, you know, what a family structure looks like, what a man's position in the family looks like, and what the woman's position in the family looks like. How do you determine a family tree? It's a lot on, you know, it disrupts the power positions and the power structures that the missionary project works towards. It disrupts the power structures that the missionary project needs in order to thrive in its agenda. And so that's why this would be such a big evil. And I think in the way that I assess, you know, how we do polygamy now, I mean, one of the few groupings of people that are, you know, proudly polygamous even now in the South African context are the Zulu people, right? I mean, we've still got a king, the king of the Zulu, who, you know, has a polygamous marriage, even though he himself, it stresses me out, the Zulu king, because he's a subject of the Catholic Church somehow. Even the missionary project is so ingrained in it's. Because how do you have a king of a whole Zulu people that is a subject of the Catholic Church? Anyway, what I do want to say is that the way that even though Zulu people agree that polygamy is still a part of what they do and an integral part of their character and the people of KwaZulu, but in practice, what is said does not translate as well in what is practiced. So you find in Nobana, abantu bakwaZulu, they all agree about, you know, polygamy is a thing that they do. But how many people do you personally know? Okay, if you live in South Africa, how many Zulu people do you know that are in a polygamous marriage? And that is because polygamy, even though it's accepted as something like it's what they do, but it's not necessarily what I would do type of situation, right? Even amongst Zulu people, because you find even Zulu, abantu don't want to engage in polygamy because their ideas of, you know, long hearts, abantu banenhliziyo ezinde, indoda etheni le engafuna ukuthatha umuntu umfazi abe mnyeke utheni efuna abayi 527. So and then there's that judgment around it, but it's about gluttony, it's about excess, it's about greed, it's about inhlizende. But really, naturally, there are some cases like that, right? There are cases where these men are just being ridiculous. Oh, I hate that show, but that shows you, but like there's a lot of this, you know, who has already 3 wives, but my girlfriends are 27. Like, why? Why are you doing that? What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing, right? So there are naturally cases of people who are badly behaved, generally, across the board. But polygamy has a purpose that it serves, and now venture to even argue, the purpose that it served prior to, in pre-colonial South Africa, actually is the same purpose that it would serve in this day and age, looking at how, you know, the capitalist system has created certain social systems and social realities between men and women, right? But with that being said, polygamy now has become something that is not kosher, and I use kosher in the pop sense of the word, like in the popular culture type of sense of the word, not in the biblical sense, right? I mean, not in the religious and the religious sense. So it's not kosher to be in a polygamous relationship, even if you are Zulu. So because there will be these social judgments around, you know, what are you doing? If you're a woman who's in a polygamous relationship, you must be stupid, you must be desperate, you must not know your worth. If you're a man who's in a polygamous relationship, then you must not love your wives enough, you must be greedy, you must be. And so when you look at all of these judgments that we pass on polygamy, even as we pretend as if we accept polygamy is something that is done in African culture, or at least done kwaZulu, it's still done kwaZulu. Even as we accept that, we still pass judgments that are very moral and properness judgments. And when you land lama judgments, when you go back and you try and figure out, eating in society lama judgments, where do they come from, and what is the foundation of these judgments on polygamy, especially if polygamy was a practice that was practiced across the board in conjunction with polyandry, right? When you think about Bantu cultures. So what is the issue? Suddenly polygamy is a problem. And when we land, you realize, no man, our uncomfortableness and our struggle with accepting polygamy as something that we would engage in now can also be traced. And you don't have doesn't have their own reason, but even those reasons, as human beings, we tend to have value judgments on things based on the society that we live in, and the society perpetuates certain ideas based on certain ideologies that have been imposed on this particular society. And when you look at the ideology that informs the way that we want to think about polygamy right now, it is fundamentally a Christian missionary project ideology. However, this is my argument. So I think, man, I learned a lot on this book, and I think one of the other things, or at least I reflected on a lot on this book, and I think the other thing that I reflected on was on ritual and the amount of ritual that we practice as African people, at least African people living in South Africa, in this year 2026, the value of ritual and how much we practice ritual. And I will argue, in Dobana, how much we practice ritual, it is criminal how little we practice ritual, how little we engage in ritual as African people living in South Africa. And the reason why we don't practice ritual in the way that we should. And when it's ritual, don't come down. Don't be excited. Oh, takati. Yes, no. And I'm not even talking about ancestor. No. I'm talking about ritual that keeps us in symbioticness with self and nature. It's criminal how little ritual we practice. And then we start complaining about certain mental ailments and imbalances because we don't practice ritual. And I argue again, based on this book, Henri, the way that we have abandoned our ability and our intentionality and our willingness and our consistency in engaging in ritual is a product of the Christian missionary project that succeeded amongst the Bantu. But I'll talk about that in the next installment. Thank you so very much. Bye-bye.